The bitter winter wind cut through the empty plains as Elias Boone guided his horse toward town, his storm-gray eyes scanning the trail for trouble. He was almost home when he heard frantic footsteps behind him and a small, desperate voice crying out, "Please! Please follow me!" Elias turned sharply and saw a little girl, no older than 7, sprinting through the snow, her face streaked with tears, her ragged dress flapping in the wind. She stumbled but didn't stop, clutching a worn rag doll to her chest. Elias jumped from his horse and caught her before she fell. "Slow down," he said firmly, crouching to meet her terrified gaze. "What's wrong?" The girl gulped for air, sobbing so hard she could barely speak. "You have to come, right now. Mama needs you." Without waiting for an answer, she grabbed his hand and pulled with all her tiny strength, dragging him toward the dark woods at the edge of the valley. Elias didn't hesitate. He lifted her onto his horse, mounted behind her, and spurred the animal into a gallop. "Show me," he ordered, his voice like steel. The girl pointed toward a narrow, hidden trail winding through the trees. They raced through the frozen forest until a small, smokeless cabin appeared, half buried in snow. Elias's gut clenched. Something was wrong. He dismounted and kicked the door open, the girl clinging to his coat. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of blood. His boots crunched on shattered dishes and overturned furniture as his eyes locked on the figure lying on the floor. A woman, pale and gasping, her hands pressed to a dark wound on her side. The girl screamed, "Mama!" and tried to run to her, but Elias held her back. The woman's lips trembled as she met Elias's gaze. With her last bit of strength, she whispered, They wanted the map," before her head fell back and her body went still. Elias froze, his breath catching in his throat. The little girl wailed in grief, burying her face against his chest. In that moment, Elias understood 2 things. This was no random attack, and whoever they were, they would come back to finish what they'd started. He scooped up the girl, wrapped her in his coat, and stormed out into the cold, vowing that no one would ever hurt her again. As he rode hard into the blizzard, his mind burned with the woman's dying word, map, and the certainty that a storm of blood and fire was about to descend on them both. Elias rode hard through the icy forest, the little girl clinging to him, her sobs breaking the howling wind. Behind them, faint shouts echoed through the trees. The bandits had returned to the cabin and discovered she had escaped. Elias urged his horse faster, storm-gray eyes scanning for a safe place to hide. "Hold on tight," he told her, his voice steady but urgent. "We'll be safe soon." The girl looked up at him with wide, terrified eyes. "Mama, she said they wanted the map," she whimpered. Elias's gut tightened. "What map?" he asked. She shook her head, trembling. "I don't know. Mama wouldn't tell me. She just said it was special. And bad men wanted it." The words chilled Elias more than the freezing air. He'd seen men kill for gold or land, but a secret like this could drive them to destroy an entire valley. The cabin's outline vanished behind them, smoke beginning to rise as the bandits set it ablaze, their furious voices carrying on the wind. Elias knew they'd follow the tracks in the snow straight to him. He slowed only when they reached a narrow canyon, a hidden path few outsiders knew. There, he dismounted and crouched beside the girl. "What's your name?" he asked softly. She wiped her tears with a trembling hand. "Clara," she whispered. Elias nodded. "Clara, I need you to be brave. Those men are hunting you, and I won't let them hurt you. But you must listen to me, no matter what happens." Clara swallowed hard and nodded. Elias lifted her back onto the horse and covered her with his heavy coat. As they rode on, she began to speak in broken bursts. Mama tried to hide the map under the floorboards. They found her. She told me to run." Her voice cracked, and Elias's heart clenched. He understood now. Her mother had died protecting a secret, and the child had been forced to flee alone through the snow. They reached Elias's ranch just as dusk settled, the sky streaked with red like spilled blood. Jonah, Elias's oldest friend and neighbor, rushed out when he saw them. "What happened?" Jonah demanded, eyes wide. Elias handed Clara down gently. "Bandits attacked a cabin in the North Woods. Her mother's dead. They're after something bigger than we know." Jonah's face darkened. "Then they'll come here next." Elias nodded grimly. "We don't have much time." Clara clung to Elias's leg, her small body shaking. "Please don't leave me," she begged. Elias knelt, gripping her shoulders firmly. "You're safe now. I'll protect you, Clara. I swear it." Inside the cabin, Elias built a fire and gave Clara warm food while Jonah checked the doors and windows. Suddenly, Clara gasped and pointed to the shelf near the fire. "Mama's ring!" she cried. Elias followed her gaze and saw a small carved wooden box tucked behind the logs. When he opened it, his breath caught. Inside was a folded piece of parchment covered in strange markings. The map. Clara's mother had hidden it before the attack. Elias's mind raced. This was what the men had killed for. Jonah leaned close, his voice low. "If they find out you have it..." Elias closed the box sharply. "They won't." But even as he spoke, the distant sound of horses' hooves echoed through the valley. Clara whimpered and buried her face against him. Jonah cursed under his breath. Elias rose, storm-gray eyes blazing. "They found us," he said. "Get ready." Outside, shadowy figures emerged from the tree line, their torches glowing like evil stars in the darkness. The fight for Clara's life had begun, and Elias knew there would be no turning back. The torches moved closer through the trees, glowing like fiery eyes, as Elias grabbed his rifle and pushed Clara gently toward Jonah. "Take her to the cellar," he ordered, his voice like iron. Clara clutched his coat, sobbing, "Don't leave me!" Elias knelt to meet her terrified gaze, storm-gray eyes fierce and steady. "You must trust me, Clara. Go with Jonah. I'll keep you safe." Jonah scooped her up despite her protests and vanished into the cabin, locking the trap door behind them. Elias crouched behind the corral fence, loading his rifle with practiced speed as the riders burst into the clearing. There were 6 of them. Rough men with scarred faces and cruel eyes, led by a tall, thin outlaw whose black coat flapped like a crow's wings. The leader dismounted slowly, his boots crunching in the snow. "Boone," he called out, his voice sharp as a whip. "We know you're in there. Hand over the girl and what she's carrying, and maybe we'll let you live." Elias rose from cover, rifle aimed squarely at the leader's chest. "The only thing you'll take from here," Elias growled, "is lead." The clearing exploded into chaos. Gunfire cracked through the night as Elias dropped the first man with a single shot. Jonah burst from the cabin, firing from the porch, his shots precise and deadly. Clara screamed from below as the floorboards shook. 2 bandits charged the corral, and Elias swung his rifle like a club, smashing one in the jaw before blasting the other at point-blank range. The leader snarled, ducking behind a trough and shouting, "Burn it all! If we can't take her, we'll smoke them out!" One of his men hurled a torch toward the cabin, flames licking hungrily at the dry wood. Jonah cursed and leapt to stomp it out, but a bullet grazed his shoulder, knocking him off balance. Elias roared, firing again and again until the last 2 men fell silent in the snow, their blood steaming in the cold air. The leader sprang up, using the chaos to grab Clara's ragdoll that had fallen from the porch. He held it high, sneering. "This is what we want, Boone. The map's inside this toy. The girl was just bait. Elias froze for half a heartbeat, shock twisting through him, then lunged forward with deadly precision. The leader fired wildly, but Elias's bullet struck first, slamming into his chest. The man staggered back, dropping the doll as he collapsed into the snow with a final gasp. Silence fell over the clearing, broken only by Clara's frantic sobs. Elias grabbed the rag doll, tearing it open to reveal a tightly rolled parchment. Jonah, bleeding but alive, limped to his side. "That's it," Jonah panted. "The map her mother died for." Elias unrolled it briefly, seeing strange markings and routes that led far beyond their valley. "Gold or land, whatever this is, it's worth killing for," Elias said grimly. He shoved the map into his coat. "More men will come once they realize their leader's dead. We have to move fast." He rushed inside and pulled Clara from the cellar. She flung herself into his arms, shaking. "I heard the shooting," she cried. "I thought you'd leave me like Mama." Elias hugged her tightly, his voice rough with emotion. "Never, Clara. You're safe now." Outside, the first pale light of dawn touched the snow, glinting off the bodies in the clearing. Elias knew this was only the beginning. Whoever sent these men would not stop until they had the map. And Clara. As Jonah patched his wound, Elias saddled the horses. "We ride to town," he said. "The law needs to see this, and we need allies." Clara gripped his hand, her small fingers warm against his calloused palm. Elias looked down at her and swore silently that no matter how many enemies came, they would never take her away from him. Elias pushed his horse hard as they raced through the frozen valley toward town, Clara wrapped in his coat and clinging to his chest, Jonah following close behind, despite the blood seeping through his bandaged shoulder. The map weighed heavy inside Elias's coat, its secret more dangerous with every mile they traveled. Clara buried her face against him, trembling with every gust of icy wind. "Are they gone?" she whispered. Elias's jaw tightened. "For now," he said, his storm-gray eyes scanning the horizon. "But more will come. The man who sent them won't let this go." Jonah rode up beside him, his face pale with pain. "You think it's just about gold?" he shouted over the wind. Elias shook his head grimly. "No, this map's bigger than that. It's land, power, something worth spilling blood for." By mid-morning, the distant rooftops of town came into view, but Elias's relief died when he saw black smoke rising near the outskirts. His gut turned to stone. "They're here," he muttered. Jonah cursed. "They've beaten us to it." As they rode closer, townsfolk ran screaming through the streets while armed riders terrorized the square, overturning carts and smashing windows. These weren't the 6 men from last night. This was an army. At least 20 riders, their leader towering on a black stallion with a red scarf tied around his throat. His voice boomed over the chaos. "Find the girl and the map. Burn this town to the ground if you have to." Elias yanked his horse into an alley, pulling Jonah and Clara with him. "We can't fight them here," he hissed. "Too many innocents will die." Jonah gritted his teeth. "Then what? Just run." Clara looked up, terrified, clutching his shirt. "They'll hurt everyone like they hurt Mama," she whimpered. Elias crouched beside her, gripping her small hands. "Listen to me, Clara. We'll stop them. But first we have to draw them away." Clara sniffled and nodded bravely. Elias lifted her back onto the horse and turned to Jonah. "Take her to the church cellar on the west side. Its strong, thick stone walls. Hide there until I come." Jonah started to protest, but Elias cut him off. "I'll lead them out of town. It's the only way." Jonah's eyes darkened with worry, but he nodded. "Don't get yourself killed." Elias rode straight into the square, rifle raised, his figure cutting through the smoke like a storm. "Come and get me," he roared. The leader's head snapped toward him, rage flashing in his eyes. "That's Boone," he bellowed. "After him!" The riders turned as one, charging after Elias, while Jonah slipped Clara through the back streets to safety. Elias spurred his horse into the open plains, the thunder of hooves pounding behind him. Bullets whizzed past, one grazing his arm, but he didn't look back. His only goal was to pull them far from the town and away from Clara. He led them toward a narrow canyon, a place he knew well. At the last moment, he veered into a hidden side path, ducking low as branches whipped past. The riders thundered blindly into the canyon, their numbers too great to turn quickly. Elias reached the ridge above and fired into the canyon wall. The unstable rock gave way with a deafening crash, sealing the narrow pass in a cloud of dust and rubble. Half the riders were trapped, shouting and cursing, while the rest scattered in confusion. Elias didn't wait to see who survived. He wheeled his horse and raced back toward town, knowing the leader would regroup. As the cold wind stung his face, one thought drove him harder than fear. The fight wasn't over, and when the sun set, Clara's safety would depend on whether he lived to face what was coming next. Elias burst back into the smoky streets of town just as Jonah emerged from the church cellar, Clara clutching his hand tightly. The terrified townsfolk had gathered inside the church, their faces pale with fear. When Clara saw Elias, she broke free from Jonah and ran straight into his arms, burying her face in his chest. "You came back," she sobbed. Elias held her close for a moment, then gently set her down. "You're safe now, Clara," he said, his storm-gray eyes hardening as they swept over the ruined square. "But this isn't finished." Jonah limped toward him, face grim. "Half their riders are trapped in the canyon like you planned, but the rest are regrouping outside town. Their leader, Red Scarf, mean as a rattlesnake, he's still out there." Elias nodded sharply. "He'll come for the map, and he won't stop until he has it." The sheriff, an older man with worry etched into his face, stumbled out of the saloon with a rifle. "Boone, what's going on here? These men claim you stole something." Elias tossed the blood-stained parchment onto a table, the map rolling open. The sheriff's eyes widened. "Land deeds, old boundaries. This is worth a fortune." Jonah growled. "It's worth killing for. Clara's mama died to protect it." Elias's voice dropped low and dangerous. "And these riders will tear this valley apart to get it." Clara looked between them, clutching her rag doll tightly. "Mama said it had to stay hidden," she whispered. "She said bad men would come if they ever knew." Elias knelt beside her, his voice softening. "They know now, Clara. But I won't let them win." Suddenly, the church doors banged open as a frightened boy ran inside. "They're coming," he cried. "A whole army of them riding fast." Panic erupted among the townsfolk. Elias stood tall, his presence commanding silence. "Everyone who can't fight, stay in the church and bar the doors. Jonah, Sheriff, you're with me. We make our stand here." Jonah grinned fiercely, despite his injuries. "Let's give them a fight they won't forget." The sheriff swallowed hard, but nodded. Together, they herded the townsfolk into defensive positions, overturning wagons for cover and loading every rifle they could find. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, the distant thunder of hooves grew louder. Clara hugged Elias's leg, tears streaming down her face. "Don't go," she begged. Elias crouched to meet her eyes, his hands steady on her shoulders. "You're the bravest girl I've ever known," he said firmly. "I need you to stay in the cellar and not come out. No matter what you hear, can you do that for me?" Clara's lower lip trembled, but she nodded. Elias kissed her forehead, then handed her to a kind-faced woman who carried her to safety. Jonah watched, his jaw tight. "We're outnumbered, Elias." Elias loaded his rifle with calm precision. "Doesn't matter. They'll have to ride through me to get her. Moments later, the riders appeared on the ridge, torches blazing in the growing darkness. Their leader raised his red scarf high, his voice booming across the valley. "Bring me the girl, Boone, or we burn this town to ash." Elias stepped into the open, rifle raised, his figure etched against the fading light. "Come and take her," he roared. The leader's face twisted with rage, and he spurred his horse forward. The riders charged like a flood, their war cries tearing through the night. Elias and Jonah fired the first shots, the battle for Clara and the future of the valley, beginning with a deafening crash of gunfire and the scream of terrified horses. There was no turning back now. The riders thundered into town like a wave of darkness, their torches streaking fire through the night as Elias and Jonah fired from cover, the first two outlaws dropping hard into the snow. The townsfolk hidden behind wagons joined in, their rifles cracking in desperate unison. Clara crouched deep in the cellar beneath the church, hands over her ears as the deafening roar of battle shook the floor above her. The red-scarfed leader rode straight at Elias, his pistol blazing, but Elias rolled aside and fired back, the shot grazing the outlaw's shoulder. The leader howled in fury, swinging his horse around as his men surged forward. Jonah shouted, "Left flank!" Elias spun, dropping two more riders before they could set the general store ablaze. Smoke thickened as burning torches flew, igniting wooden rooftops. Screams tore through the night as townsfolk fought to put out the flames while still defending their positions. The sheriff, crouched behind a water trough, yelled over the chaos, "We can't hold them much longer." Elias's storm-gray eyes blazed. "We don't have to hold them, we just have to break them." He grabbed a crate of dynamite from the wagon and lit a fuse with the tip of a burning torch. "Cover me," he barked to Jonah. Jonah's rifle cracked, keeping the riders at bay as Elias sprinted through the hail of bullets, his boots pounding the frozen ground. He hurled the dynamite toward the center of the charge, diving behind a broken cart just as it exploded with a deafening boom. Horses screamed, outlaws scattered, and the tide of the attack faltered. For a brief moment, hope surged through the defenders, but the red-scarfed leader was relentless. He bellowed, "Push forward," and his men regrouped, charging straight into the smoke. One rider leapt from his saddle and tackled Jonah, the two men grappling viciously in the snow. Jonah slammed his fist into the outlaw's face, finally knocking him unconscious, but blood streamed from his own nose and a gash on his temple. Elias saw Jonah falter and charged to his side, firing point-blank to drop the outlaw who aimed at Jonah's back. "Stay on your feet!" Elias growled, dragging him behind cover. Jonah spat blood and nodded weakly. Suddenly, Elias's world narrowed to a scream. Clara's scream. He spun toward the church and saw two riders breaking through, heading straight for the cellar doors. Rage burned hotter than the fire around him. Elias sprinted, gunning one man down, then tackled the second off his horse. They crashed into the snow, wrestling savagely. The outlaw slashed with a knife, cutting Elias's coat and slicing his ribs, but Elias roared through the pain, twisting the man's wrist until the blade dropped. With one final strike, Elias slammed the outlaw's head into the frozen earth, leaving him motionless. Clara burst from the cellar, tears streaking her dirt-smeared face. "Elias!" she cried, throwing herself into his arms. "I was so scared!" Elias hugged her fiercely, breath ragged. "I've got you, Clara. I'll never let them take you." The red-scarfed leader saw Clara in Elias's arms and screamed like a madman. "She's mine!" he charged, swinging his pistol. Elias shoved Clara behind him and raised his rifle. The two men fired at the same instant. The leader's shot grazed Elias's arm, spinning him, but Elias's bullet struck true, slamming into the leader's chest. The outlaw toppled from his horse, dead before he hit the ground. His men froze, their morale shattering. Some dropped their weapons, others fled into the darkness. Jonah stumbled to Elias's side, gasping, "It's over! We won!" Elias's storm-gray eyes swept the battlefield, firelight reflecting in their depths. "Not yet," he said grimly, clutching Clara to his chest. "The ones who sent him will come next, and we need to be ready." As dawn's first light touched the smoking ruins of the town, Elias knew this battle had saved Clara's life, but the war for her future was only beginning. The first pale light of dawn broke over the smoldering ruins of the town, painting the snow pink with blood and ash. Elias stood in the center of the square. Clara clutched against his chest, his coat torn and soaked with blood from the gash along his ribs. Jonah leaned heavily on a broken wagon, his face pale and streaked with soot, one eye nearly swollen shut. The townsfolk emerged slowly from hiding, their faces hollow with shock. The sheriff limped toward Elias, rifle still clutched in his trembling hands. "Boone," he rasped, voice hoarse from smoke. "We've counted 7 dead, 4 wounded bad, but you stopped them. You saved this town." Elias's storm-gray eyes burned with a quiet fury. "No," he said, his voice low but sharp. "This was only a warning. Whoever sent that red-scarfed devil will come with more men. They won't stop until Clara and that map are theirs." Clara stirred in his arms, her tear-swollen eyes opening. "Elias," she whispered, "is Mama safe now? Is it over?" Elias's chest tightened painfully. He knelt, setting her gently on her feet and cupping her small face in his rough hands. "Mama's safe now, Clara," he said softly, forcing his voice to remain steady. "But we still have to be strong. There are bad men out there, and we have to be ready." Clara sniffled and nodded, clutching her rag doll tightly to her chest. Jonah approached, his limp pronounced, his voice hard. "We can't just wait for them to strike again. We need to find out who's behind this and take the fight to them." Elias agreed with a grim nod. "First, we bury our dead and tend our wounded. Then, we track them to their master." As the townsfolk began digging shallow graves in the frozen ground, Clara knelt beside Elias, helping him place flowers on a small mound marked with a wooden cross for her mother. Silent tears streamed down her cheeks as Elias wrapped an arm around her shoulders. His own grief silent but deep. "I promised her I'd keep you safe," he murmured. "I won't fail you, Clara." Jonah joined them, his face shadowed with exhaustion. "The men we fought last night were well paid," he said quietly. "Someone with power wants that map." Elias unrolled the parchment carefully, tracing the strange symbols with a calloused finger. "This isn't just land," he said. "It's a network of roots and resources, gold, water, grazing land. Whoever controls it controls this whole valley." Jonah's eyes narrowed. "Then we destroy it." Elias shook his head. "No, if we destroy it, they'll tear this place apart looking for another copy. We have to keep it safe and hidden." A sudden shout rang out from the edge of town. A lookout pointed toward the ridge, where a lone rider sat silhouetted against the rising sun. The rider held up a black flag before turning and disappearing into the hills. Elias's stomach turned to ice. "That wasn't a scout," he growled. "That was a messenger." Jonah swore under his breath. "They know we survived. They'll be back in force." Clara clung to Elias, her voice trembling. "Please don't let them take me." Elias lifted her into his arms, holding her close. "They'll have to ride through me first," he vowed. That night, as the townsfolk gathered in the church to plan, Elias prepared supplies and weapons. He placed Clara in a small bed near the fire, brushing a strand of hair from her face as she drifted into exhausted sleep. Jonah stood in the doorway, rifle in hand. "You know this ends in blood," Jonah said quietly. Elias's storm-gray eyes glinted in the firelight. "Then let it end on our terms," he replied. Outside, in the darkness beyond the town, unseen riders gathered like wolves, their torches flickering in the distance, a silent promise of the storm yet to come. Before dawn, Elias saddled his horse with quiet precision, while Clara slept wrapped in blankets by the fire, her small chest rising and falling peacefully for the first time in days. Jonah staggered into the barn, his limp worse than before but his rifle steady. "You really think going after them is the smart play?" Jonah muttered, his voice hoarse from smoke and exhaustion. Elias didn't look up, his storm-gray eyes focused on the rifle he was loading. "If we sit here, they'll burn this town to the ground and take Clara. The only way to end this is to cut the head off the snake." Jonah grunted but didn't argue, knowing Elias was right. Clara stirred awake, rubbing her eyes, fear flashing across her face when she saw Elias ready to leave. She ran to him, clutching his leg. "Don't go. They'll hurt you like they hurt Mama." Elias knelt, holding her tiny hands in his. "Clara, you're the bravest girl I've ever known. I'll come back for you, but I need you to stay hidden with Jonah and the sheriff. Can you do that for me?" Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she nodded bravely. "Promise?" Elias kissed her forehead. "Promise." With Jonah riding beside him despite his injuries, Elias set out at first light, tracking the hoofprints left by the fleeing riders. The trail led into the high canyons where the sun barely touched the frozen ground. Hours passed in tense silence until Jonah raised his hand, pointing to a distant column of smoke. "Campfire," he whispered. Elias dismounted and crept forward, staying low among the rocks. From a ridge above, they saw nearly 30 men gathered in a clearing, their black tents marked with a strange symbol, a jagged serpent. In the center sat a hulking figure draped in a dark coat, his face hidden by a scarf. Elias's jaw tightened. "That's the one pulling the strings," he growled. Jonah's eyes widened. "They've got more men than we thought. Charging in there is suicide." Elias's voice was low and fierce. "I'm not here to fight them all. I'm here to make sure they never reach Clara." As they planned their next move, a distant whistle pierced the air. Elias's stomach sank. "They know we're here," he hissed. The camp erupted in shouts as men leapt onto their horses. Bullets cracked through the canyon walls, forcing Elias and Jonah to dive for cover. "Ride!" Elias roared, scrambling back to his horse. They tore through the narrow trails, hooves pounding, pursued by a swarm of riders. The canyon walls echoed with gunfire and shouted curses. Elias twisted in the saddle, firing back with deadly precision, dropping 2 pursuers, but more kept coming. Jonah gritted his teeth, blood seeping through his coat. "We can't outrun them," he shouted. Elias scanned the twisting paths ahead and spotted a narrow rock bridge spanning a deep gorge. "We don't have to outrun them," he said coldly. "We just have to get there first." They galloped onto the bridge as bullets chipped stone around them. At the far side, Elias dismounted, slashing the ropes that held the fragile structure in place. Jonah barely made it across before the bridge collapsed, taking several riders into the abyss below. The survivors reined back, screaming in frustration as Elias and Jonah disappeared into the trees. Gasping for breath, Jonah clutched his side. "That'll slow them, but they'll regroup fast." Elias wiped blood from his face, his eyes blazing. "Then we go straight to their leader's stronghold. End this before they ever reach Clara." Back at the town, Clara sat by the window, clutching her rag doll, unaware of the deadly game unfolding in the canyons and the storm of violence racing toward. The sun was sinking behind the jagged peaks when Elias and Jonah finally reached the enemy's stronghold, a hidden valley where dozens of horses were tethered and black tents circled a roaring fire. At the center stood the leader, a massive man with a dark coat and a snake emblem stitched across his chest, his red scarf fluttering in the wind. Jonah crouched beside Elias on the ridge, his face pale with pain, but his grip steady on his rifle. "There's too many," Jonah whispered. "We try to fight them all. We're dead men." Elias's storm-gray eyes were hard as iron. "We're not here to fight them all. We're here to cut the head off the snake." He reached into his coat and pulled out the blood-stained map. "This is what they want. I'm going to use it to draw him out. When he comes for me, you take the shot." Jonah's jaw clenched. "And if I miss?" Elias loaded his rifle with slow precision. "Then neither of us makes it out alive." They crept down the slope, staying in the shadows until they were close enough to hear the outlaws laughing around the fire. Elias stepped into the open, holding the map high. "Looking for this?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the valley. The camp erupted in chaos. The leader's head snapped up, his scarred face twisting with rage. "Boone!" he bellowed. "Kill him and bring me that map!" Riders surged forward, but Elias fired into the air, drawing their focus. "You want the map?" he roared. "Come and take it yourself." The leader dismounted, snarling like a beast, and charged through his men. Jonah crouched on the ridge, rifle steady, waiting for the perfect shot. Elias backed toward a cluster of boulders, firing steadily, every step calculated. The leader closed in, swinging a curved blade. Elias ducked, the blade slicing through his coat, and slammed the butt of his rifle into the man's ribs. They grappled savagely. Fists and boots striking, the map tumbling into the dirt. Jonah squeezed the trigger, but an outlaw spotted him and tackled him from the side, the shot going wide. Chaos exploded. Elias and the leader rolled in the dust, the outlaw's massive hands closing around Elias's throat. Spots danced in Elias's vision as he fought for air. With a desperate surge, he grabbed a fallen knife and drove it into the man's side. The leader roared, staggering back. Elias snatched the map and slammed his fist into the man's jaw, sending him sprawling near the fire. Jonah broke free of his attacker and aimed again, his bullet striking true this time, hitting the leader in the chest. The outlaw toppled backward into the flames, his screams echoing through the night before they were swallowed by the fire. The remaining men froze, their courage shattering at the sight. Some fled into the darkness, others dropped their weapons and surrendered. Elias stood over the burning body, chest heaving, his face streaked with blood and soot. Jonah limped to his side, gasping, "It's over." Elias shook his head, his voice rough. "Not until Clara is safe." They gathered the surrendered outlaws and forced them to march ahead of them back toward town. As they traveled through the moonlit valley, Elias held the map close, knowing its danger was far from ended. When they reached the outskirts of town, Clara burst from the church, running toward Elias with tears streaming down her face. "Elias!" she cried. He scooped her up, holding her tightly, his voice breaking. "I kept my promise, Clara. No one will ever take you from me." But as the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Elias knew this was only the beginning of a new battle. A fight to protect not just Clara, but the entire valley from the darkness that had risen to claim it. The first light of dawn spread across the valley, soft and golden, melting the last of the blood-stained snow and bathing the battered town in warmth. Elias rode at the head of the small column, Clara bundled safely in his arms, Jonah trailing behind, with the captured outlaws tied together on foot. The townsfolk gathered in the square as the group approached, their faces a mixture of relief, awe, and lingering fear. The sheriff stepped forward, his voice trembling with emotion. "Boone, you've done what no one else dared. You brought them back alive and ended this nightmare." Elias swung down from his horse, setting Clara gently on her feet. "It's over for now," he said, his storm-gray eyes sweeping over the crowd. "But there are more like them out there. This map isn't just paper. It's power, and it's dangerous." He held up the blood-stained parchment, and a murmur rippled through the crowd. The sheriff reached for it, but Elias pulled it back. "No one man should own this," Elias declared. "We'll lock it in the church vault and bury its secret deep. Let it die with us." The townsfolk nodded solemnly, understanding the cost of greed all too well. Clara clung to Elias's coat, looking up at him with tear-filled eyes. "Are they gone? The bad men?" she asked in a trembling voice. Elias knelt beside her, his rough hands cupping her small face. "They're gone, Clara," he said gently. "No one will ever hurt you again. I swear it." She threw her arms around his neck, and he held her tightly, his throat thick with emotion. Jonah limped forward, smiling through his pain. "You kept your promise, Boone," he said gruffly. "You brought her back." Elias nodded, glancing at his oldest friend. "We both did." Over the next few days, the town began to heal. Wagons were repaired, roofs patched, and graves dug for those who had fallen in the fight. Clara followed Elias everywhere, a small shadow at his side. Slowly smiling again as laughter returned to the square, the townsfolk, who had once doubted Elias's quiet strength, now greeted him with respect and gratitude. One afternoon, while Clara played near the corral, Elias and Jonah stood watching the horizon. "She's different now," Jonah said softly. "Stronger." Elias's gaze softened as he watched her twirl in the sunlight. "She's been through hell," he said. "But she'll grow here, with us." Jonah arched a brow. "You sure you're ready for that? Raising a child ain't like defending a town." Elias's lips curved into the smallest of smiles. "I'd rather face 100 outlaws than see her alone again." That evening, Elias took Clara to the small hill overlooking the rebuilt church. The wildflowers were just starting to bloom despite the cold. Clara knelt and picked a single yellow flower, handing it to Elias with a shy smile. "Mama liked these," she said softly. Elias tucked the flower into his coat pocket, his voice thick. "Then we'll plant a whole field of them." Clara's face lit up, and she leaned against him as they watched the sun set. As night fell, lanterns flickered to life across the valley, warm and steady. The sheriff sealed the map inside the church vault with Jonah standing guard. Elias carried Clara inside the cabin that was now her home, placing her gently in a bed piled high with quilts. She grabbed his hand, her voice sleepy but sure. "You won't leave me, right?" Elias sat on the edge of the bed, brushing a curl from her face. "Never," he vowed. "You're my family now." Clara closed her eyes with a peaceful sigh, and Elias sat there long after she fell asleep, watching over her like a sentinel. Outside, the night was quiet for the first time in weeks. Elias stepped onto the porch, gazing at the dark hills where so much blood had been spilled. Jonah joined him, leaning on his rifle. "Think it's really over?" Jonah asked. Elias's storm-gray eyes were calm, resolute. "No," he said, "but whatever comes, she'll never face it alone." In the distance, a lone wolf howled, not in warning, but as if saluting a bond forged through fire. Elias turned back to the cabin, to Clara's soft breathing inside, and for the first time, he allowed himself to hope.